All right, so back after the break. You guys well rested? Not really, because you probably did tons of homework over that week off. Yeah, no doubt. I had an interesting week this week. So last week I got let go at my job because we lost one of our biggest clients that we had. CBC Marketplace did a nice little splash on them and basically called their product snake oil, and that kind of deep sixed their business. And then the website developer, the only website developer, which was me, because we were building a Rails site, they said we didn't need you anymore. So that was it. So I applied to another job and I got hired, and I started at G-Shift this week. G-Shift is now owned by a company called Get Mintent. Fantastic company out of Vancouver. So I am tired because I was up at 5 o'clock this morning to be at G-Shift for 7 so that I could work a full 8 hour and then come here. So I'm a little worn out today, so we'll try to make this as quick and painless. So this is week 1 of the new kind of structure that we're going to do. So basically the idea is that the class will be broken into 2 sections. The first section will be a lecture and then part 1 of a lab. So if you're here, you're guaranteed to complete at least half the lab. And then the second part will be another lecture and then the rest of the lab. The labs are really, really small, very easy to consume. Most people were done before they left class last week. So it's not going to be too bad. The only other thing I would like to quickly talk about is this nasty piece of shit that we did in the midterm. Just a couple of things. I'm not going to go that in depth in it. If you want to see more of my conversation on this, I would watch Tuesday's class, just even like the first 5 minutes of Tuesday's class, because I go quite in depth about this test. So that will help you kind of get an idea of where I saw fail points. Tuesday's test and Thursday's test were basically the same test, just a couple of differences, just to avoid the whole hassle of not knowing who's who. All right, so one of the biggest things I noticed was the functional scoping. I definitely blame myself for this because I think it's the wording. Global scope, functional scope, block scope, and non-mutable variables. I believe the question said, for one, define a global variable. A lot of people, I don't think really anybody got that one wrong. I think most people got that one right. I'd say at least 90% of you got that one right. Some of you stuck let in front of it. Some of you stuck var in front of it. If you didn't stick it in a function, which a lot of you did, but if you didn't stick it in a function and you put let or var on it, I gave you the point. I gave you the mark. Because technically within the scope of the file, it is a global variable. If you stuck let and var in front of it and then stuck it in a function, that is definitely not global because it's now block scope to the function. So anyways, yeah, so that was that one. The other one was the functional scope, which is done with var. The only real difference between var and let is that var is only scoped within a function. So functions, you know what a function looks like, right? They all begin with the word function, right? And then you have these wonderful curly braces. If you define a variable with var in here, this is automatically scoped within here, which means if you try to access x out here, what do you get? Does anybody know? You get a reference error, right? Because it's not defined. Because it was defined in here, it wasn't defined outside of here. However, if you drop the var and then try to access x, is it still a reference error? No, it isn't, you interactive bunch. It's not a reference error. It's just a global variable, so it's accessible as long as it's been defined. So the difference between var and let, though, let still only scopes with inside here, but it doesn't really care about this word. It doesn't care about the function word where var does. Let doesn't care because let is scoping between these two things, which are known as a block. And that includes if conditions, while loops, for loops, anything that basically has curly braces. Even if you just stuck a set of curly braces on the page and stuck a variable in it, it's scoped within inside those curly braces if you use let or const. Yeah.
So you can declare a global variable variable within a function and still have it be global?
You can declare a global variable anywhere. Keyword in there is global. It's the thing that basically says, yes, this is available absolutely everywhere. JavaScript's unique because in order to declare the global variable, you just call x, right? So you would just say x with no scoping modifier before it, no let, no var, no const. Whereas other languages like PHP require you to add the global keyword in order to make it a global variable. Yeah.
What about between pages?
If the file can see the other file, it's available. Yeah. So if you called a file here and defined a bunch of variables and then you added your next file underneath it, so it loaded this one, then this one, they're available in here. If you reverse those, then no, because it's in order of declaration, right? So, yeah. All right, so a lot of you actually wrapped variables in functions, which you didn't need to do. All you needed to do was this. Global was just the variable by itself with no scoping modifier. Var made it functional. Let made it block. And const made it a non-mutable m block. But a lot of you wrapped it inside functions. I didn't deduct marks for that. All I did was, some of you just literally threw code at the screen and hoped that something would stick. So I just looked, and if you define let or var or const inside that block and it kind of made sense, then I gave it to you. I gave you the point. So you didn't lose points for that. I was very, very liberal on marking. Same with this thing. You guys didn't have this one. You had 5 plus 5. And if you wrapped it in number, so it would have looked more like this. Right? Is that the one you guys had? Does anybody remember? Yeah. So to make this work out and equal 55, or sorry, equal 10 and not 55, which was the whole thing, all you had to do was, does anybody remember? What do you wrap this in?
Number.
Yep, number. I would have also accepted parseInt, because parseInt would have worked as well. Some of you did do parseInt, which was totally fine. Basically, as long as it resulted in 55, I was happy with it. But yeah, so if you didn't do that, though, and you just left it the way it was, or some of you just took the quotes off. And I was like, no. Sorry, but no. Cheeky, but no. Yeah, the string stuff was basically okay. A lot of people forgot about this dot replace one. Some of you used the regex inside of it because you discovered quickly that if you do this, it'll only replace one instance. So you found out that the regex will actually do double instances. If you wrote that, or you wrote, basically if you wrote dot replace, I gave you the marks. I didn't really care what you wrote inside as long as you wrote dot replace. I gave you the mark. And then the rest of it I'm going to kind of leave except for one other thing. This thing here. I always get alarmed when I ask for indexes. You guys were supposed to grab the second element from the second array. And a lot of people basically wrote this kind of thing. What would that actually grab? Yeah, the third element from the third array. So, have you guys worked with a language that's not zero indexed? Not where the arrays aren't zero indexed? I didn't think so. So I was kind of alarmed by that. But yeah, so if you did that, you definitely got no marks on that because that to me was intro to programming class, and you should know better. So that's basically the way that worked. However, that affected, I hate to say it, more than 50% of the class. Between this class and the other class, more than 50% of the people who did the test. Which was, yeah, that's a lot. All right, cool. So that's basically that. If you want to know other stuff about the test, like I said, watch Tuesday's class. It's only the first, I think it's actually 10 minutes long. You can watch that first 10 minutes and I talk about other pieces of the test. Otherwise, you're welcome to communicate with me through Skype or sorry, not Skype, Slack or email. I'm really tired. Slack or email. And if you want to talk about your test specifically, then you're always welcome to either make an appointment with me or come meet me after class and we'll take a look at it real fast. But yeah, that's basically it in a nutshell. Okay, cool. So today we are going to talk about something that I'm teaching this class again next semester. So what I would like to do, starting next semester, I'm going to move this lesson to almost lesson 1. Just because I feel like it's the most important part about JavaScript, and we use so much of what we're about to learn today every class so far that it's going to seem familiar, and it's going to help you hopefully connect dots, which I think I would rather start this class with. That's the only problem when you first teach the class. It's a bit of a learning process at the same time for me as well. All right, so if you can pull down from week 8 the starter DOM part 1, go ahead and open that up inside your IDE. Open the index file inside your browser. I will do the same. Looks like I goofed up here. Oh yeah, did I ever? I spent the week learning Linux because where I work, all the computers have Linux on them, so it's not OS X and it's not Windows, it's Linux, which is a treat. Yeah, I miss my OS X, but I'm getting used to it. All right. So you want to go ahead and open up the index file, and if you've got it correctly pulled down, you should see this. This is the other new thing that I'm going to do from lesson to lesson. All of our lessons will basically be formatted this way. It'll have a write-up that you can go ahead and study. So that way you have it for your study notes, and obviously that makes it a little bit easier too when you're doing the tests. You can refer to it. And yeah, it's still interactive. We can still modify it and do some crazy things. So today we're going to talk about the DOM, the Document Object Model. I've mentioned this a few times. The DOM is a very important part of JavaScript, but it's actually an important part of your browser. When your browser actually creates this thing called the DOM, and it's based off this thing called the DOM specification. So the DOM specification is basically a bunch of eggheads that got together and said, this is the methods that you must have, these are the way a DOM structure needs to be put together, these are the properties that you must contain. So DOM, believe it or not, is not exclusive to JavaScript. You can actually access DOM components through PHP. They have the DOM document class that you can work with. Ruby uses, I think it's also called DOM something, but I use a gem called Nokoguri, and that makes it a little easier to work with it. But C++ as well, there's tons of them. They all have usually libraries that work with DOM structure. So it's not exclusive to JavaScript. And once you start working, if any of you decide to become web developers and work in the web field, you'll find these libraries that interact with the DOM and do a lot of the same things the DOM does, like creating node elements, creating HTML elements, and stuff like that. The DOM, simply put, is an object. You guys have done object-oriented programming. You probably did it from intro to programming almost, right? You guys did Java, which is totally object programming, right? It's 100% object-oriented. The DOM is simply an object. It is no different than the objects you create in object-oriented programming. So objects have properties, right? They have methods, right? Those are two very common attributes of objects. You guys might not call them properties and methods. You may have had a teacher that calls them data members and data fields, or data variables. Some people call them that. Attributes, fields, functions, data functions. There's a whole bunch of different terms for them, but basically what it boils down to is that the properties help describe or set settings on your object, and the methods are functionality, things that the object can actually do, right? So if you have a person, things like eye color, hair color, speech, right? Like what the language they speak, those would be properties, right? But talking, walking, and hearing, those would be methods, because those are functional things that you do. All right, so like I said, the DOM, it's no different. It is an object. It's just a gigantic object. And it contains multiple properties as well as methods that basically allow us to do CRUD operations, right? So create, read, update, and delete different things within our document structure. The DOM, like I said, is not exclusive to JavaScript, but often the two are used in tandem. A lot of people will say, I want you to build something to interact with the DOM. I want you to listen to click events on the DOM. They're usually referring to JavaScript. It's very rare they'd be referring to anything else. On page load, the JavaScript API actually creates a new version of your page. So right now we're looking at an HTML page. If we were to right-click on the page and take a look at inspect, or even view page source for that matter, you can see all these wonderful little tags. HTML is an XML-based language, right? So how many of you actually worked with XML before? Just a couple? Yeah, it's kind of dying. It's definitely a dying language. JSON is 100% replacing XML. But HTML, it's not dying, and it is definitely XML-based. The idea is that you have tags with a word inside of it, and then you have a closing tag with the same word inside of it, and it encapsulates a bunch of content in between. Those words are supposed to have meaning, no different than a JSON key, for example, would have meaning. However, you guys, when you took HTML5, they actually do have meaning now. They have semantic value, semantic meaning that, when you define a tag as article, the semantic value means this is an article. It's not just some random div on the page. It's an actual article. This is a paragraph. This is, attention text. That's why it's wrapped in strong or emphasis. It actually has semantic value. Anyways, JavaScript, however, does not care about your semantic value. It does not care at all. It does care about those tags because when the API rips through, it actually takes a look at the tag so it can create a tiny little object for that tag that represents that thing. And that thing becomes what's known as an HTML element. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. We've done a lot of this already. We've been selecting elements out of the HTML page quite a bit using Query Selector and Query Selector All. That's basically what we've been doing. Every time we reach out with Query Selector and grab like hashtag message or hashtag game board or something like that, we're essentially reaching through our DOM structure and using a tag. We're trying to find an element that's in the page and bring it back to us for our JavaScript to use, right? And it comes back as an object. But I feel like there's a bit of a separation to what we're doing when we select to things you've done already. Selecting elements of the DOM with CSS. So elements, like I said, are simply HTML blocks. Body is an element. Div is an element. A tag, anchor tags are elements. They're all HTML tags are elements. So everything that's wrapped inside a set of triangles is an element. You have likely selected elements in the past using CSS. Has anybody in here not done CSS? Yeah, I didn't think so. You've had to use a combination of tags, IDs, class names, and attribute names to be able to crawl through the DOM and select specific HTML pieces to style, right? Yeah, so let's do that. So if you open up the Starter DOM Part 1, and you take a look at the styles.css, you will see 4 steps there. And we're going to go right back to your HTML class. We're going to select elements on the page, and we're going to style them just like we would if we were doing CSS. So if I want to select a tag on the screen, so say the span element, I just write in the actual name of the tag. Span is not a class. It's not an ID on the page. It's not an attribute. It is the actual name of the HTML element that's on the page. When I reference this span, am I referencing one span? Or am I actually selecting every span in the document? Yeah, exactly. I'm getting every single span in the document. So why don't we color them? You can color them whatever you want. You can color them pink, blue, whatever color you want. Or you can make them bold if you want to. If you want to practice your CSS. I'm just going to make them all red. Refresh, refresh, refresh. Why are we not refreshing? Oh, because I didn't save. There we go. How many of you have actually installed Live Server and are working with it? Only one? Two? Yeah. Do you like it? It's just so awesome. Yeah. If you heard that, you should install it. It is awesome. All right, so when we select a span or any HTML element on the page with the tag, we are actually grabbing every single one of those tags on the page. So when we color them red, we're coloring every single one of them on the page red. If I wanted to do the same thing with a class name, I do it using the dot selector. So I have a class on the spans called class style. It's just a word I've made up. That's all it is, right? It's under the class attribute. If you wanted to see that, all you have to do is right-click on step 2 there, click inspect. It'll load up this thing, and you can see right here on the element that there's an attribute called class, and its name is class style, right? Now I'm going to color it a color. You can color it whatever color you want, or not a color. Make it disappear if you want to. Whoops. I'm going to color it orange. It didn't change over here, and I'm not entirely 100% sure why. Oh, because I've got some weird arbitrary S on the end of it. Because I keep hitting Control S because I've been using Linux all damn day. I forgot about my command key. Same thing when we're using the ID element, right? ID elements are really cool. Ideally, and I don't mean that as a pun. Ideally, how many ID styles should be on the page? One, exactly. That's the whole point of ID. The word, it's in the word, right? It's an identifier. It's a unique identifier, so you should ideally only have one on the page. If you run your code through W3C's validator, you'll get an error actually if you have the same ID listed twice. I'm going to color this one purple. 9B5, 9B6. These colors, by the way, I'm grabbing from Flat UI Colors. It's a website that's very dear to my heart. I use it all the time because I am terrible at selecting colors. This is Flat UI Colors. You just go here and choose the color you want. They even have it broken down by country. So there's like, if you're drawing or you're basing a website for a specific country and you want to make sure you use that color palette, you can. It's pretty cool. Anyways, that's a side note. And then attribute. Not many of you probably have done this. I know the Tuesdays class said that this was fairly unfamiliar. But you can actually select elements by an attribute. So if I look at the last span, you can see here that I have an attribute called data CSS equals attribute style. If I want to select the element by that attribute, I can type in data CSS, right? That will select every single element on the page that contains an attribute called data CSS. If I was to do it by the href, it would select every single element on the page that has an attribute called href, which would be like every anchor tag on the page. So I'm going to do data CSS. If I want to be specific, though, and select it by its value, I just add an equal sign with a set of double quotes, attribute style. Give it a block, color, and then whatever color you want, I'm going to use probably my favorite color, 3498DB. It's got that bootstrap blue. Really do like blue. Blue's a good color. So the interesting thing is when you're selecting with CSS, it's teaching you something at the same time because it's teaching you how you can do the same process inside JavaScript. You can actually do the same kind of thing in JavaScript and go select those elements using these same things, the span, the class, the ID, and attributes. You can use all three of those select elements on the page. Now there was an old way to do it, and we're going to look at that first because a lot of you use that in your test, but I want to stress, this is old. Nobody does this anymore. .query selector and .query selector all have existed and been supported since IE8, and nobody gives a shit about that. So as long as it's existed since before the newer browsers, we're good. We can use it. If you're supporting for a client that wants you to support IE7 and IE6, then you should be charging them through the nose for that, right? So that's the point, though. We can use Query Selector, but let's talk about these things because you guys do use them, and I want to show you how they're used because you had a few hiccups with them. So one thing that's kind of cool is it's really in the name. You're going to learn quickly it's in the name. When the DOM is created, it creates an object for us called document, right? That's the main thing that we use. You guys have used document quite a bit. We've called document.querySelector. We've called document.querySelectorAll. A lot of you called getElements. There's a bunch of different things you can do with document. It's not limited to that. You can call events on document. So document is also our entry point when we want to select elements from our page. It's usually where we start. It has the same properties as any other HTML element, including the selection methods we're going to look at below. Now you'll notice in that write-up, HTML element is written as one word. And you might be like, dude, you forgot a space. But I didn't forget a space. The reason why HTML element is written as one word is because it's a symbol name. And while JavaScript doesn't necessarily have classes, unless you're using ES6, this, you can kind of consider it to be kind of like a class. It's essentially a data type, right? So you know when you guys, I'm not sure if you knew this actually, maybe you don't. When you create a class, you're actually creating a brand new data type. Did you know that? Some of you do, yeah? Every time you create a class, you create a brand new data type. And that's essentially what this is. It's a data type called HTML element. Based on the HTML element, they call them interfaces in JavaScript. But let's just pretend it's a class just for sanity's sake for right now, okay? It is different though. Anyways, HTML element is when it's instantiated, right? And you've got back your element from the thing. So if you were to query select a span, when that comes back, it comes back as this thing. It comes back as an HTML element. Document is an HTML element. Document also has query selector on it, which you guys already know because we've run it like 100 million times on it. Document comes back, and it is also an HTML element. The interesting thing about document, though, is document is your literal document. It's everything from the body tag, all the different pieces inside the body tag, all the way down. It's the whole structure, all of it, in one go. When you call document, that's what you're accessing. You're accessing that entire document that is available on the page. So let's write something here. So we're going to select and store the h1 element into a variable using the method document.getElements by tag name. So give me 1 second. I just want to open up my notes here. Oops. There we go. Because I don't remember the variable names I used. Const by tag name equals document, which is the object, right? And like I said before, all objects have properties and methods on them, right? Or can have properties and methods on them. This is no different. Get elements within capital E, sorry, and an S. The S is very important. By tag name. Okay. Is get elements by tag name a property or a method? Yep, it's a method. That is correct. The telltale are these two things right here. They're basically letting you know, hey, this is a method. Generally, methods are also written verbally in a way that sounds like this thing does something, right? So tend to be, not all the time, but yeah, usually they're written in a way that can kind of give you an idea that they do something. Now, we have to give it an argument. What's that?
Especially get.
Yeah, especially the word get, yeah. Getters and setters, you probably wrote tons of those. Yeah. Actually, I think Java does it automatically for you, doesn't it? Getters and setters. C++, you get to write that shit. All of them, every single one. It's really tedious and monotonous and annoying. Anyways, so we have to provide one argument to get elements by tag name. What do you think I need to pass this thing? I want to select the H1 on the page. H1, that's right. Just the tag name itself. The H1 tag name.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, man.
Why there's a difference when you use its double quotes? Sometimes I'm not sure in this case, but I use it double quotes.
Let's find out. We'll open this up, get the console up, and we'll take a look. We'll just uncomment this. If we remove the dot constructor, so we're just calling the by tag name, that's what it pulls back when we use the single quotes. So it's an HTML collection is what we're getting back. So now if we switch this to double quotes, in this scenario, no difference. If you ever catch it, just document it because I'd love to know. There's not supposed to be any difference between single and double. There is a difference between backticks and any of those because backticks support string interpolation. But yeah. All right, so I'm going to write back in what I had here before. By tag name is our actual thing that we're pulling back on the page. Dot constructor is the constructor, right? It's the thing that created this class, right? Or this object, in fact. And I can grab its name, which will tell me what the data type is that we're looking at. All right. So the data type that we got back was an HTML collection. Before I explain what that is, let's grab the next thing. Select and store this element into a variable using the method document.getElementById. by ID. So this is going to be const by ID equals document dot get element, no s this time, okay? That is important, by ID. And it's called select ex-1. -1. There we go. And you can uncomment the next line after it. And you'll notice that even though we're selecting it by the ID, there's no hashtag. It's automatically implied that it's there. It actually, in fact, if you were to add the hashtag, it will give you an error and tell you it couldn't find it. And then we'll do the last one real fast as well, which is the class. Const by class name equals document dot get element by class name. And this one I just called select ex2. Oh, sorry, it's get elements by class name. All right. When we select things on the page, we get them back in two different formats. Either we get back a collection of elements, or we get back one element. Okay? Collection of elements, you can kind of think of it like an array, but it is not an array. It is very important to understand. It is not an array. It is a list, and it is a list of HTML elements. Okay? Let's see where I was. So all HTML elements on the page come back as this thing. All HTML tags come back as an HTML element. The thing that separates them between a list is how we select them. And these three selectors kind of make sense when you read them, right? We get a collection back when we call get elements by tag name for the same reason why when we color the span, it colors all spans on the page. It makes sense, right? You can have more than one span tag. You can have more than one paragraph tag. So that's why the method name is called getElements. It tells you in the method name what it's going to return. I'm going to return back multiple elements to you. So it comes back as a collection. The next one, getElement by ID. Again, it's in the name. Remember how I said IDs should be unique. You should only ever have one of those on the page. You shouldn't have more than one ID on the page of the same name. So it makes sense that it would only ever return one single HTML element. So that's why, again, it's in the name, get element by ID. It's returning one element, and sure enough, it returned our HTML span element, which is really just one of these. And then the by class name, again, classes are not unique, are they? You can have a class name on multiple things. You guys have done that in your assignment with card value, right? You had multiple cards, likely 52 cards with the word card value attached to them. Again, it's the same idea. You can select multiple of those on the page. So again, it's in the name. Get elements by class name. The problem is remembering these things is annoying. Remembering what they return can be kind of annoying as well and unpredictable. And programmers don't like unpredictable things. We want things to always be in the format we're expecting them to be in. So that's why we now have query selector and query selector all, because they work extremely predictably. Query selector will always return this. Always. Never fail. Will always return an HTML element. Even if there's multiple on the page, it will only return the first instance it finds. That's how it works. Query selector all, however, works a little different. It always returns back what's called a node list. It's almost the same as an HTML collection. It's a list of HTML elements. Even if you select an ID, it doesn't matter. It comes back as an HTML list, which makes it very predictable for you if you're trying to do iterations and you're dynamically populating the selector, right? So if you're popping in the selector that you want to access and you don't know what they're going to add, then you don't need to worry about that because you're retrieving using the same method all the time, which means you don't have to try to guess. Oh, okay, well this is get elements by ID, so I have to treat it this way. Oh, well this is get class by ID, or by name. Get elements by class name, so I have to treat it this way. So we have abandoned those. We don't use those anymore. They're not going to be on the test. Only query selector all going forward will ever be referenced in this class and on the test. Okay? Cool. So let's do that. Let's do some query selectoring. So an HTML element, I'm going to say this about 20 times in this lesson, in this lecture. HTML element represents an HTML element, meaning it represents a tag inside your HTML document. It's an object that represents that tag. Contains different properties and methods based on the tag, but for the most part, they all have roughly the same properties and methods. They have query selector, they have query selector method or query selector all on them. They have .lengths, they have .text content. Some of them have value. There's a lot of different properties and stuff, but it's a good idea to always remember that these things are an object. All right, so let's select and store the h2 tag on the page using the document.querySelectorAll. So I'm going to scroll up so you can actually see where the h2 is. These are the h2s here. So that's going to look like this. Const the h2 equals document.querySelector. And it takes a CSS selector string. That's the other cool thing about query selector and query selector all. Because it uses a CSS selector string, you already know how to select elements on your page because you've done it with CSS. Now you're just doing it in JavaScript, and you can do it with just regular CSS selectors. Cool, you don't have to learn something new, right? Let's uncomment that and see what we get back. We get back this cool little HTML element here. If you want to see the actual object itself, what you can do is change this from log to dir, but we don't need to. We really only care about this thing here, which is an HTML heading element. Again, it's one of these. It's the same as that. All right, let's do step 5. Step 5, we'll grab it by ID this time. Const QSID equals document.querySelector. Now, like I said, this is done with CSS selectors, so this time we do have to do the hashtag, just like you would in CSS. We select via the hashtag. Did I not call it QSID? Yeah, I called it QSID. Is that not what it's called on the... Oh, yeah, you see I goofed. It's capital ID. Computers are literal. They take everything literally. But notice once again, this time we've got a span element that's come back. But again, it's only one element. We're only getting one element returned to us, not multiple. Even though we're selecting by the ID, we should only get one element back. But notice it's exactly the same as when we selected from the H2. We get the same usable piece back. We get an HTML element back. What we predicted is what we get back. Let's do one more. This really shows it. QS class. Query selector. Dot. And you have to use the dot because, like I said before, it's the same as any CSS selector. QS class. And we'll uncomment the next line. Now, I can tell you there's 5 QS classes on that page right now. There's 5 elements on the page with the class QS class. And it only brought back 1. And not only did it only bring back 1, it only brought back the first instance it found. Okay? And the way that works is when you're building your HTML page, right, it's in the order that you're actually putting things. That's how they get returned. So even if it's nested, doesn't matter. It will climb through the nest, find the QS class, and return that one before it moves to the next nesting. Okay? So it's not at a certain level or anything like that. Query selector all is a little different. Query selector all always returns a node list. It always returns a bunch of HTML elements if it can find them. If not, either way, it's still a node list, even if it's only got 1 in it. You're always guaranteed to get a node list back. So let's do, let me find it here. Let's grab all the articles on the page. There's actually only one article. Notice my naming convention here. Notice what I called my variable name. I called it articles. That's intentional. I always do that. If I'm storing an array or I'm storing a list of any type, I always call my variable a plural. And I don't know if that's an MVC thing because I've done so much MVC and that's kind of what they do in MVC. I'm pretty sure it's just a programming thing. I think it's just something you should do, right? It's English. Just use the language. Use a plural, right? So now if I uncomment this out, sure enough, we get back a node list. Node list contains a list of elements that it has found. And if you're using Chrome, it's probably also in Firefox as well. You should be able to click the little arrow beside it, and you can see the list of articles. Well, there's only one article, so we only have one. But it's predictable because it returned a list, which means I can iterate, right? If I want to iterate through that list, I totally can. I don't need to worry that my user has selected only one element. It doesn't matter because I'm always guaranteed a list. And I can iterate through one element. That's totally legal in programming, as long as it is in a list format. All right, step 8. Select and store all the paragraph tags on the page. Well, there's a lot of those. I think there's 20. We'll query selector all. What is my CSS selector to grab all the paragraph tags? Just P. That's it. Just P. P is the P tag, right? That's what the paragraph tag is in HTML. It's P, written like that.
It came to affect the paragraph page.
Yeah, that would be, yeah, that'd be nuts. However, we went from the B tag to the strong tag. So we kind of went up in, yeah, letters, but that's fine. Bold was not contextual. It didn't make sense. All right, so select and store all of the QS class elements using the class, using document.querySelectorAll. Instead of that, I'm actually going to select the QS ID. Remember how I told you IDs are unique. There's only one on the page, right? Using query selector all, if we were, circa IE 8, it would only return one element. But now it should return a node list, and it does. So let's call this const QS ID with an S on the end of it, IDs, equals document dot query selector, and it's hashtag QS ID. You can't forget the hashtag. Oh, sorry, query selector all. Otherwise, we will only get one element. And then we'll write out the next statement, which is console.log QS IDs, comma, QS IDs dot constructor dot name. And what did we get back? Did we get back one element, or did we get back a node list? Got back a node list, right? That's a lot more predictable than getting one element back and going, oh shit, my for each loop just blew up. So interestingly enough, because query selector and query selector all work on CSS selectors, we have some cool things we can do. We can DOM walk, and we can do it in two different ways. We can DOM walk with CSS, right? You guys have done that before. Started at the article tag, then did like a little arrow and grabbed all the P tags on the page, or you grabbed the UL, the first UL, and then you grabbed all the LIs inside that UL, and then you styled them all, right? Please tell me you walk the DOM with CSS. Okay, good, because it's going to make a lot more sense. But we can also do it in a different format. Like I told you before, document is one of these. It's an HTML element. And when we call query selector, what's happening actually is query selector is trying to find all the nodes that we want, all the HTML elements that we've asked for within the scope of document. Well, document's the whole damn document. It's the whole page, right? So that's cool. It'll just go through all of it. But based on that, you should be thinking, if I return back one element, though, like say I grab the list element on the page, and then I call query selector on that element itself, will it still go from document down, or will it go from list down to do its search? All right? It does, yeah, exactly. It does it via the list. It scopes it now to the one that you selected. Let me show you what I mean. All right. Using the document.querySelector method, select the first OL on the page. All right, so let's do that. OL. If I only want to select one element and return the first instance, do I use query selector or query selector all? Query selector, that's right. And we'll even display it. There we go. Now, using that OL element you have selected, you can go and grab all the LI tags, all the LI elements within inside of it, not worrying about moving around the document. In the document itself, there's 20 LI tags, I think. No, there's 12, sorry. Kind of overshot it with 20. There's 12 LI tags on the page. If I was to call document.querySelector.li, I will get back all 12. But the cool thing is we are now able to call query selector within the scope, and I want all the LIs underneath there, so is it query selector or query selector all? Yep, query selector all, LI. And let's put that in a variable. And notice when I do that, I actually get back a node list of only 4 elements. And if I look at those 4 elements, they should be these first 3, it should be the first 4. It should be these 4 spans. So I can click on the node list beside it. There's the LI. So I'm going to look for this one here. Select and style this element. So I'm going to click on the first one. And I'm just going to look for that text to see if it's in there. Yep, sure enough, inner text. Select and style this element using the tag. It's the first LI, the first 4 LIs that it found within this OL selector. Now the thing is that gets a little, there's times that you would do it this way, where you first use document and select the OL, and then you would dig down in and go grab those LI tags. There are times you would do it this way, and then there's times where you would do it using just a simple CSS selector, because query selector takes a simple CSS selector, which means using a CSS selector you can crawl the DOM and go grab those tags. So that looks like this. Const first section PS equals document dot query selector all, right? Because we want to grab all the paragraph tags on the page. I'm going to uncomment the next line, and it's going to blow up in my screen here because I haven't actually selected anything yet. Anybody want to give me an idea of what that selector would look like? I want to grab the first section on the page. Let's start with, I always like doing CSS kind of backwards. I want to grab all of the P tags inside the first section. So I start with all the P tags. How would I grab all the P tags in CSS? Just P, that's right. Okay? Then I want to grab all the P tags within a section. So how would I grab the section? Just section, right? This will grab all the P tags in the section. However, I may have a P tag here, right? But it may be inside a span. And then I have a P tag here and a P tag here. How do I not select that one? There's a symbol I can use here. Yeah. And that will only grab the direct children of section. Now we're still not quite done yet because I need some room, so I'm going to write this over here. There we go. How do I grab only the first section? Sure. Pseudo selector. So pseudo selector means the 2 dots. And there's a bunch of different ones. There's first. There's the one that I used, which is first of type. You can use first of type. There's first child. There's a whole bunch of different ones. I'm going to use first of type because that's the one that worked for me. So it's section, colon, first of type. Only grab children at the top level, P. And if that works, you should get back a node list, with only 2 paragraph elements inside of it. Cool. Who didn't understand the CSS selector? Who doesn't want to admit they didn't understand the CSS selector? If you had difficulty understanding this, W3 Schools has like it's like 20 minutes maybe, if you're lucky. Help jog that CSS memory. Specifically look at pseudo selectors because they're fantastic. They're very helpful with this type of stuff. But the cool thing is about this is in one line, instead of 2, in one line, we were able to retrieve the entire node list back just using a CSS selector, which is great because you guys already know, most of you know how to use CSS selectors. And now you can apply that to JavaScript to grab elements on the page. All right, cool. Lab part 1 / break. It's all enrolled into one. If you go ahead to week 8, I have the weekly lab right there. Go ahead and pull that starter.zip file down. And once you pull it down, you should see a starter file with an index main.js and a styles page. The only stuff you care about is the stuff sitting inside the main.js. Open up the file for it, though. I can remember what I did with it. I thought I had it open here. Maybe I don't. Open up the index file because it tells you the instructions. I guess it doesn't matter, as long as I'm in one of these. Okay. Don't get nervous. You're not doing anything with cards, really. You're just styling and modifying them a little bit. You're not flipping them or shuffling them or anything crazy. All you need to do is the first three. Just part one. We'll do part two after the second one. So just part one, just these three. Select and store all the card values in the HTML page. Now my wording is a little off, which I didn't realize until after the Tuesday group would have been working on it. I don't want you to actually grab the values. I don't want you to grab the values at all. All I want is the HTML elements. So just what we just learned, essentially, is what you're doing. I only want the HTML elements. If you want to grab the values and try to challenge yourself, go ahead. That's totally up to you. But all I really want is the HTML elements. So change the word values to elements. Select and store all the card elements in the HTML page using walk the DOM. Now you can use either the CSS selector method, so that thing I just erased, or go grab the first element and then use the .query selector scoping method to go grab the second one, and then solve 2 and 3. And that's it. Let's see, you have 15 minutes for that, and then you have 15 minutes for a break, so 5:30. And then we'll call it at 5:30. We'll move on to lecture 2. Oh, and you can work together. Sorry, meant to say that. You can totally work together. That's 100% okay. So hopefully you were able to get those 3 steps done. We're going to do the next part, and then that will open into the rest of the lab, which I believe there's like 10 steps in total for the rest of the lab. So it's not too bad. So what I would like you to do is pull down Starter DOM Part 2, and we'll do the next lecture. And I'll get it open on mine as well. Starter DOM 2. Kind of wish Sublime was a little better when it came to its drag and drop. Like, I wish I could just drag the index HTML over to the thing instead of having to open it up in Finder to do it. It seems really stupid. All right. So once you've got it down, open up the main.js. That's where we'll be working. And this is the DOM part 2. So like I keep saying over and over again, HTML elements are objects, right? The DOM is an object. JavaScript is mostly objects. Like 99% of the things in JavaScript are objects. Even the native data types that you might use, such as string, Boolean, and number, they start off as those, but the second you do something to them, like store them into a variable or modify them in some way, they get wrapped in an object and they become an object. So everything in JavaScript is an object. Next week, we're actually going to talk about prototypal inheritance and a whole bunch of very sophisticated stuff around JavaScript objects, because JavaScript is not a class-based language. It is very object-oriented. It uses something called interfaces instead of classes, and it's a little bit of an advanced concept to understand, so we're going to take our time and we're going to do it slow over 2 classes. And we're going to learn what prototypal inheritance is and how it works with JavaScript and objects. But today, we're just going to create a very simple object. Very, very simple. Create our own object out of the box. Do some stuff with it. So, as stated before, the DOM is simply an object. It's no different than objects you create in object-oriented programming. The DOM represents our entire HTML page. It provides, like objects do, properties, methods that allow us to create, read, update, and delete various different things. The HTML element, the thing that you keep returning with query select, is an object. The node list is an object. It has properties, it has methods. Most things in JavaScript are objects. Objects have properties and methods. This is a very important concept you need to understand. If you don't understand what an object is, I recommend reviewing your notes from your Intro to Programming class on object-oriented programming. It's very important that you understand that concept. In standard object-oriented programming, classes are created as blueprints, right? Is that how you guys learned what classes are? They're basically a blueprint for an object. When I define a class, say in Java or in PHP, is it available to me as anything? Like, can I go read a property on it? No. I can't do anything with it until I do what? Instantiate it, right? I have to instantiate it and create an object. In JavaScript, it's a little different. In JavaScript, you don't have a class, so you're not instantiating an object. In fact, when you create your object prototype, it's immediately available. You immediately have access to it. You can immediately do things with it and work with it because it exists. It's in existence. Classes don't exist until you instantiate them as objects. They're just blueprints. They're just informational to developers to say, hey, you're going to have these properties and you need to have these methods. When you create this object, that's what will be available to you. But it's your problem. You need to set it up, right? It's not the same in JavaScript. When we set up an object, it has everything we need at the time, but then we can use that as basically a template to create more of them and just create multiples of this thing, okay? But we're going to look at that in particular next week. However, JavaScript does not use classes, it uses object prototypes exclusively. Those of you that are familiar with ECMA 6 might argue with that and say, no, JavaScript's got classes. They're in ECMA 6. However, they are not the same. They are technically, they look the same, they kind of feel the same, but they are wrapping prototypes. It's just to make it easier for people that are new to JavaScript to understand it. The only problem is because it's only available in ECMA 6, if you try to run it in IE 11 or back, it doesn't execute properly without polyfills. So it's not something you should rely on. In Node, you're fine because you can transpile. So to give you an idea of what an object looks like, we're going to create one. We're going to create a new object and we're going to call it person. So under step 1, we're going to say let person equal, and I'm going to write a set of curly braces. These curly braces are known as an object literal. I literally want to create an object. I'm going to just move the closing curly brace down to line 8. So it's already there for me. Like I keep saying over and over again, like a broken record, objects have properties, objects have methods. Let's create some properties. I'm going to give the object a name, an age, and a gender, and an array of interest. So name is Sean. And you can use single quotes or double quotes, totally your preference. Age, I'm 39. God help me. Gender, male. Interests, and for interests, what's really cool with objects, object properties just take values. It doesn't really care what it is. You can put anything as a value. You can put a string, you can put a number, you can put an array, which we're going to do here. We're going to put an array as our value. Now, interestingly enough, I'm going to call this a method, but it's not technically a method. Technically, this is still just a property with the value of a function definition. But let's just, for argument's sake and ease of understanding, we are going to create a method, so to speak. We're going to call our method greeting. And I'm going to give it the function definition. So just an anonymous function. Just in case you haven't been noticing, I've been putting commas after each one of these. That's important. It's a list inside there. It's a list of keys and values. And inside here, I'm just going to output a message. So I'm going to use some dirty backticks for it, because I like string interpolation. It's nice and easy to work with. Hello, my name is, and I want to output my name. Now, in classes, if I want to reference a property inside the class body, there's a very specific keyword that we use. And it's common in most class-based languages. Does anybody know that keyword? It's very common. I want to access the property within my class. I want to access its property. This. Yes, this. Very, very common keyword. We have that in JavaScript as well. This refers to the current scope that I'm in, right? So I'm in the object scope, so it's this dot name. So now I'm accessing this property that I set up here. And I'm going to do string interpolation again. This time I'm going to access the age. Years old. I jokingly said on Tuesday that it's a very weird way to greet people. Hey, I'm Sean, I'm 39. You don't generally tell people your age right off the bat. And this isn't Tinder. All right, let's define a bio. So we're going to create another method, right? But it's not a method, right? It's not a method. It's a property with a function definition as a value. But we're going to call it method just for argument's sake. Bio function. And this one's long. You can write whatever you want, though. You don't need to necessarily make them as long as this. I'm going to use dirty backticks with some string interpolation again. This dot name is a this dot age, year old, this dot gender, who is interested in this dot interests, and I can't leave it that way because what is interests? Yeah, it's an array, right? So it would just spit back the array, which would be weird. It would actually just comma separate them because it would call to string on it. So we're going to use that handy function we learned a while back called join, and we're just going to cheat. This is probably not the most grammatical correct it could ever be, especially if you had a long list. Kind of sounds like the way a 5-year-old would talk. I like trucks and cars and boats and airplanes, and that's basically what we're saying here. But it works. So this creates our object with some properties, right? We have a name property, an age property, a gender property, and an interest property. And they have various different types of data inside them. Names containing a string, and so is gender. Age contains an integer or a number. Because remember, JavaScript only has one type of data type when it comes to integers and floats, and that's number. Interest is containing an array. Greeting is technically containing a function definition, which is actually the data type function. And bio is containing a function definition. Okay, but we're going to call those methods. And it looks like Sublime kind of treats them like that as well by syntax highlighting them a little different. So now we can actually output person. So you'll notice on line 18, I just moved it up a bit, 17, I have a console.log for person. And if you open up your element, or your, this thing, console is the word I'm looking for, you'll see your objects spit out there for you to look at. And you can click the little arrow and see the different pieces for it. And just like other objects we've looked at inside our console, you can see which ones are properties and which ones are methods. How can I tell if it's a method? The arrow? This thing? Yeah, that kind of works, but interest has an arrow, and it's not a method. This handy little F. The F is very handy. The F tells us this is a fucking function. Is basically what it's saying to us. All right. So how do we use this stuff, right? Like, how do we call these different things that we have? If I want to call name, age, and things like that, I'm going to skip down to step 7 here. They're very easy to call. It's just console.log person. And you can do it in 2 different ways. You can either write brackets and write name inside of it like that, right? And if I refresh, you'll see Sean, right? Or you can use the dot syntax because it's a property, like so. And you still get the same thing. And if I want to output age, it's just person.age. Okay? Very easy to call properties. Just like you would in Java's dot syntax, right? You would do it pretty much the same way. You had a class, an object instantiated called person, and it had a property called name. You would call person.name, right? Does that sound right? Yeah, that's what I thought. It's the same way in Ruby. In PHP, you use thin arrows. In C++, it's dot syntax unless it's a pointer reference. In greeting, if we want to actually call these functions, we can do person.greeting. And believe it or not, that's valid. That would just, it's not going to put anything out to the screen. You're not going to see anything unless you console log it. But you could console log that and see the function definition. But if we want to call it, what do we need? Yeah, we need the parentheses. There you go. Hello, my name is Sean, and I am 39 years old. And I like trucks and cars and planes. And then the bio, same thing, person.bio. And there you go. Sean is a 39-year-old male who is interested in comics and programming and movies. Please swipe right. I'm just joking. So that is a very basic object. Next week, we're actually going to look at how to create like a very basic object and then add things to it as we go, or how to create, even more importantly, basically an object template that we can now use almost like a class and create multiple objects from it and define them and set them and do crazy cool things with them. We're also going to talk a lot more in depth about by copy and by reference next week. Hopefully you guys have done some by reference and by copy things, or by value. In JavaScript, all objects, arrays, they're all actually only variables and only simple variable values are actually passed by value. Everything else is passed by reference. So that's an important gotcha that can catch you up sometimes. All right, HTML element properties and methods. An HTML element is an object that represents your HTML tag, right? We've said that before. In HTML, a tag describes its content. For example, article tells the browser that the content contained inside is semantically connected to an article. We talked about this as well, that those tags in HTML5, they have semantic meaning, right? If you had Scott as your HTML teacher or Jessica, they would have pushed that on you quite a bit. The semantic interpretation of your page is very important, especially now with Google. Google is, we actually at GShift, we build a page analyzer. The page analyzer is looking to see how your page is formatted, and if it's just div after div after div and there's no real semantic value, you'll actually get a lower score. And that score does affect you on Google as well. It's basically telling you you need to give semantic value to your page in order to score higher on Google. That's a very important thing in web development. Anyways, however, JavaScript doesn't care. JavaScript could care less about your semantics. It doesn't matter to it. It doesn't care that you meant that it was an article or you did that as a section. It doesn't care less. Every HTML tag will become an HTML element in the DOM. That's just how it works. In addition, the HTML element inherits properties and methods from various other objects available, such as element, node, and event targets. And you can think of this like It's not class inheritance, but you can think of it like class inheritance, right? So for example, when we've been spitting these out, we had one called HTML span, whoops, not with a capital P, span element. And it actually inherited things from HTML element, which inherits things from element, which inherits things from node, which inherits things from event target. Know the add event listener that we used? Which one of those do you think it comes from? Event target, right? Makes sense, right? That's where event comes from. It's coming from the event target. That's where we get add event listener. That's where we get on click. Those properties and all that are coming from this wonderful object for us. It gets passed down into node. Node is where text nodes come from. They're where HTML elements come from. Basically anything on your HTML page is a node. Every single piece, whether it's raw text or whether it's an HTML element, they're all nodes. Then we move into element. Elements are HTML, not necessarily HTML elements, because I believe text nodes are also considered an HTML element. Then we go into HTML element, and that's where you get query selector all of those come from there. And then HTML span element, and there's heading element, and paragraph element, and a whole bunch of them. And the only reason why they have their own separate kind of object is because of things like, for example, form elements have dot value, they don't have dot text content, right? But all the other elements have dot text content. Images have dot source, and so do links. They have dot source. But nothing else needs dot source because that doesn't exist for them. Picture element has dot source. Anchor tags have dot href, right? But nothing else requires dot href. So there's this extra piece. Just like in classes, where you start with a very generalized class, and then as you inherit, you slowly refine and become more specific till you finally reach, a very specific point, right? So you would have bank as the top. Accounts would be like the next one, and then you would have checking, savings, right? And then under savings, you might have deferred savings, GICs, RRSPs, RESPs, stuff like that, and you get more finite as you go down further. It's the same thing with the DOM. When you load your page, this immediately comes into existence. It's an automatic thing. You don't need to instantiate this. You need to do nothing. This just automatically exists. All right, so let's do a little bit more stuff. We're going to select and store the H1 element on the page. So we've done this last time. We did const H1 document, equals document. And what do I want? Query selector or query selector all? I only want to get one. Yeah, query selector. And what's my selector? H1. Is H1 a class, an ID, a tag, or an attribute? It's a tag, yeah. We'll go ahead and console log that out just as it is. There it is. And I want to change a property on this tag. So what's really cool is as we go through, they each have different types of things. So HTML element actually provides us a property that all of these guys have, and it's called style. What do you think style does? I think you're saying something about CSS. Styles affect the presentation of our element, right? Just like CSS does. It's a shortcut to all the CSS styles that are attached to your element. And what's cool is style is an object itself. Style contains tons, whole bloody list of every single HTML style that can be possibly affected on that particular element. We can show you this. If we console.log, we'll console.log h1.style and refresh your page. I just want to select the thingy. There we go. And you'll see down here you have CSS style declaration. And if you click it, underneath it is every single property that you have access to change. So if I wanted to change the background color, I would just call dot background color and make it equal, because it's a property, it's not a function, right? So I'm not going to use parentheses. I'm going to make it equal to whatever color I want. So if I wanted to affect my H1 at the top here, this is the H1, and I wanted to make it pink, just the text, which style would I use, which style property would I use to change the text color? Color. So I'm going to go dot color, and it's the American spelling, don't get triggered, equals pink. Refresh. Boom, it's pink. And there's tons of them, right? You can change the background color as well. You could do h1.style. And background color would be just background color. And the easy way to remember this is in CSS, it would be background color, right? All you have to do is remember to remove the hyphen, capitalize every word. That's the way it works. So it's all snake or camel case. And then just make it equal to something. What's a good color that goes with red or pink? Green? Does green go with pink? Green does not go with pink. Oh, that's definitely not going to go. But we're going to leave it. That works enough. Actually, if we're going to do that, we have to create 3D. Not sure if you've ever caught this before. Some people see it this way. If you put red on top of blue, some people say that I see it this way. The red will actually punch out of the page towards you, and the red kind of recesses backwards. It's kind of interesting. There's a whole art that's done, and I can't remember what it's called, like chromography or something like that, and it's all based on that, just using red and blues to create depth perception. It's kind of neat. All right, so we have other things available to us as well. We can actually change text, right, on an element, providing it has the text content. So I can say h1 dot, now it's not a form element, so I know it's not dot value. I know it has dot text content on it, equals h1 dot text content. And how do I make it uppercase? To uppercase. To uppercase is a method that is available on, is it only available on HTML elements?
No, it's
Yes, exactly. It is a method of the string object. So that's where this is kind of interesting, because we're actually looking at a lot of objects here. That's horrible. When we look at this, we're actually looking at that H1 is an object, right? It's what kind of object is H1? Sorry? A tag? No, I'm actually looking for the object. Out of all of these objects, just ignoring this one, we'll start at the kind of this level up. Yeah, it's an HTML element. And so it's an object. It gets worse than that, actually, because it's an H1, sorry, it's a heading element, which means, and then it's an HTML element, so it's two objects, right? Plus it contains text content. Text content is a string, which means it's inheriting from the string object, so there's a string object as a part of it as well. And then, where was I going with that? Yeah, that's it. We basically have three objects. Everything is an object. H1's the object, text content's an object, right? The string that text content is actually returning is an object. All of these things are objects that we're working with. So that console.log and console.dir are really handy to you because it's a great way for you to see what properties and methods are available on those objects. And I noticed some of you doing that through the test, and I was like, hey, that's fucking impressive. You were like typing console.dir and then throwing your thing in there just to see what you had available to you, and then you were using that in order to try to kind of make your way through it. And I was very impressed with that because that shows that you're using your console to its fullest limit. So let's talk about, this leads to another important concept in JavaScript. A variable property value can be of any type, right? So just like I showed you up here, this is actually a property. It is not a method, right? I said we're using the name method just to simplify, but it's not. It's not a method. It is a property just the same as name, age, gender, and interest. They're just keys. That's all they are. They're just names, they're just labels, they're just properties, right? Just like when you create a property in a class. The difference is with a class is each of these, when you define a method, you have to actually create a function. But in JavaScript, we don't do it that way. We just provide a function definition. We just say, here's a function definition. Now if I actually want to call this, it's those parentheses that make all the difference. Adding the parentheses to the end of it is what calls it out as a function. But at the end of the day, it's just a value. We can have any value we want. We are not limited to these values. We can actually make name equal to an object, which is exactly what HTML element is doing. And that being said, we can take a look at some objects that are available to us from H1 and all of the other ones by going through these next steps. So select and store the first OL element in the HTML document. So let's do that because it will help me demonstrate what I'm saying. Document.query selector, because we're only grabbing one. And uncomment the console.dir. The dir is really only important for those of you using Chrome. If you're using Firefox, Firefox is pretty cool and loads it up as a object as opposed to the node thing, which looks a little easier to work with. But anyways, here's our object. Oh well. And the cool thing about this is if I had like IDs and classes and stuff, it actually lists them all out. It lists out the selector basically. So it's OL, hashtag object example. And if I had a class on that, it'd be dot, whatever the class's name was. And if I had 16 classes on it, it'd be like dot, 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 and it would just keep doing it. Anyways, we click this little arrow on here. And this is no different than the object we created before. These are exactly the same thing. They're both objects. There's really no difference. They both contain properties. They both contain, function definitions. They have arrays in them. But one other key thing is they have objects in them, and we can see that. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see there's two elements here, child nodes and children. And if you look beside them, you can see their, basically their constructor name or their class name, if you want to use the word class name here. You can say that this is their class name, right? And they match up to, what the hell's all the chalk? Somebody hates chalk. There's like a big mound of broken chalk there. They match up to things like this, right? We get a node list and an HTML collection. If I click on the node list, each one of these is now, each one of these is this guy here. And we can actually click in further and see more information. Incidentally, if you click on an LI, you can see it also has a child nodes property with an object assigned to it called node list. And that's where the text is. And documents even worse. If you actually console.log document, actually we'll just dir document. Document is our whole HTML page, right? Here's all our properties. Go to child nodes. There's our document, right? There's the first node, the HTML node. If I go into the HTML node and go to child nodes, there's the head, text that's in the head, body, right? Click on the body one. Go to child nodes, div container, which is where we currently have most of our stuff. And you can just keep working your way down. There's our header, the main header. There's the H1. And there's the text, the DOM part 2, right? So the value is not limited to functions, arrays, numbers, or strings. It can be a whole object as well. Now earlier I said Objects are passed by what? Reference or value? They're passed by reference. And that's a very cool thing to understand because this is not a copy of each of these things stored in here. This is a reference to those things that exist on the page. So if you start a document and go to the H1 and style it, you are styling the same one as if you selected the H1 right off the page as an element. It's never a copy, it's always by reference. So it's a cool thing to understand. It's very efficient, right? It's very efficient to work through reference as opposed to creating a copy. Imagine how bogged down your website would be if they were all copies of these things, especially with how big the DOM can get, right? Have you guys ever looked at the most horrible website in the world? It's like, let me see if I can find it. Did you say go to Tumblr? It's very famous. Yeah, I don't want a neo-Nazi website, obviously. Oh, where is it? I can't remember. I'll have to, you know what, I'll send Scott an email and ask him because he remembers it. But anyways, basically, it's got music on it. It's got animated GIFs. And I mean like plural, as in like hundreds of them. GIFs and every possible advertisement for every possible networking marketing scheme you've ever seen in your life. All on this page with a tiny little block in the middle of actual content. It's the worst site in the world. It's the grossest colors you've ever seen. But the person has something like almost 1 million hits a day on this site. Probably because it's so god-awful. But it's pretty interesting. I'll see if I can find it, and then I'll send it as a link to everybody. All right, we're almost finished. Now we want to select and store the properties value that contains a node list. So I just showed you the node list. It's very easy for us to actually grab the node list, though. We can go, we're going to store it in a variable. We'll call it const children equals first OL. Remember I told you that this is an HTML element, right? So we have access to query selector and stuff like that, but now scoped. But we're actually just going to directly access the children. And then we can console log that out. And there we go. It returns back an HTML collection. HTML collections and node lists are very similar, right? They're both lists of HTML elements. However, node lists are a lot more verbose because the node list actually returns back the text elements as well, not just the HTML elements. And we can see that if we want to grab all the child nodes, nodes equals first OL dot child nodes, and console log that out. You can see that we have a lot more elements inside our list than just the LIs that were returned back with the children property. Step 16, using a for of loop, iterate through the children and output the text content of each child. All right. There is a big difference between these things, and something I'm going to show you that's kind of interesting. When you're trying to figure out if you have a function available to you, an easy way to do that, right now, everything we type in here becomes available to us. So if I type in child nodes inside my console here, you can see, actually, let's make that a little cleaner. You can see that it's listing all the elements in here. Child nodes is available to me, and that's because we defined it in our JavaScript file. So it's actually available to me right in here. That's how I'm marking your lab 1, because sometimes they don't work. So what I do is I call generate character, and if your generate character function works, you get full marks for it. Even if the rest of the thing's total garbage and not working at all. It doesn't matter. Because I have these things available to me until the first fail. Then everything after the fail is unavailable, right? But I can also copy and paste code in there and stuff like that as well. Because I have child nodes in here, I can click dot, and then I can say, okay, let's see if we have for each. I want to iterate through this list of stuff, and I want to use for each to do it. So I can type in for each. As long as the preview has this little F on it, it means that that function is available to me. Okay? Let's try it with children. Children dot for, notice nothing's coming up. What I can do is I can actually just call children dot for each, hit enter, and it says undefined, right? Because remember how we learned many times that we can literally just spit out the function definition. We don't need to actually execute it. It says undefined, whereas if I do that with child nodes, I get the actual function definition. Okay, so that's an easy way to tell if something is available to you. Do I have for each available to me on this list? Oh, looks like I don't. Do I have this method available to me on this list or on this item? No, I don't. The console is a great way to be able to tell that. So we're going to use a for of loop because we don't have for each available to us on the children. It's not a function that's available, so we'll use a for of loop. So we'll do for let child of children, right? Of iterates through array type objects. Console.log child, and I'm just going to spit out the actual text content. Tell them to call you back. And when I spit it out, I get all of the different list items. Create a new object called person. Give you object. Wow, grammar is not my forte. Give you object a name, age, gender, and an array of interest. Now with the child nodes, though, I'm not limited to that, right? Because I have for each available to me. I can use for each. So I'm going to say child nodes dot for each. And for each takes what? Does anybody remember? Yeah, it takes a callback. You can write it as an arrow function if you want to. I was impressed. Some of you wrote almost your entire test with arrow functions. Just completely were like, fuck functions. I'm using arrow functions. Which I was like, yeah, that's cool. I mean, embrace it. Why not, right? Have any of you ever coded in Golang? Out of curiosity? Yeah, it's hell. So at G-Shift, my starting day is yesterday. And they're like, yeah, so our shorty URL system isn't working. And we need you to fix this one particular thing in it. And I'm like, yeah, okay, no worries. Because I worked there originally a long time ago and I built a lot of the different things. And I'm like, wait a minute. That's not in Ruby, is it? And he's like, no, it's a Golang. Fuck is Golang? So they have very bizarre things, but one of the biggest bizarre thing that Golang has, I'll show you. They have these very bizarre functions. So this is a function in Golang. The way it works, solely bass backwards too, right? So you have your name, your function name, which is add, right? Your arguments, you would think they were int and int, and that their data types would be x and y, but it's reverse in Golang. In Golang, x and y are the argument names, or the parameter names, and int is the data type. This thing confused the heck out of me. I had no idea what that was. I was like, what is this?
It's the type of the function.
Yeah, it's the return type. But what's even worse, much worse, is there's functions sometimes written like this. What that means is, this is my argument x and my argument y. This is my return. And all you do now is just call return. And it immediately returns x. Hold on, I'm not done. It gets much worse. That is a constructor in the middle of your function and says, add is now a method of string, the string object, and its return value will be x. So incidentally, I spent a day learning Golang, trying to figure out what it was doing. Yeah, it gets even worse when you get into if conditions and stuff like that. What a nightmare of a language. Anyways, I thought I'd share that experience with you. All right, we're almost done. Child nodes for each. We all know how to do this stuff. We're just going to console.log node.textContent. Done. Hit refresh. Only this time you're going to notice there's great big gaps between where it's outputting. The reason why there's gaps, can anybody guess why there's gaps?
Text.
Yeah, it has to do with the text content. It's because text node does not have a property called text content. But JavaScript, being the wonderful thing it is, isn't throwing an error. It's just undefined, right? It doesn't exist. It's not available.
But it would show undefined if you try to do.
Oh, you try to do anything with it, and it's going to be, yeah, you might get a reference error. Yeah, that is for sure. Yeah, if you call 2 uppercase on it, oh yeah, it would, actually we could show you that. It'll blow up right at the point we try. We should get a reference error. Oh, that's weird. We didn't actually get a reference error. Bizarre. All right. Maybe there is a text content property on it. It's just empty. Interesting. Anyways, that is literally all I have for you. And I'm hoping to make these lessons short and chunk like this to give you time and help for labs and stuff like that. And like I said, you should be able to complete these labs basically within the class, and I'm here to help you if you get stuck. So you're going to move on to part 2. In part 2, you're going to first select and store the hashtag myfavoritecard div element. I've already given you the selector there. Then you're going to iterate through the first row node list and change the background color of each element to whatever color you want. That's just a suggested color. You do what you want. And then change the color to whatever color you want. Preferably not the same color, so you can tell the difference between the two. Then iterate through the second row node list and change the text to uppercase. And then create a new object with your first name as the object name. Add the name and age properties with your name and age as values. Add a property called favecard with one of the cards from the first or second row as the value. Note, you must access the card from the first row or second row. You have to actually access the element. You can't just type the number in that you currently like. And then add the following as text content to the my favorite card element. Name is age years old, and their favorite card is favecard. Replacing the variable with the appropriate values. And that's it. You should be definitely done before you leave, likely. It's really not that much stuff. Most of it's copy and paste. So, all right. Any questions? No?
What does practice mean?
What does what mean?
Practice value. Like this one, that's not
Where are you looking? Which step?
9.
9? Add a property called favecard. Oh, you must access the card from the first row variable. Meaning, don't just write K. Access the card and grab the text content from it.
So since we have the list available.
Yeah, go grab the element. Even if you just use, so what's cool is when you get back these HTML elements like this, so when you get it back in HTML collection, you can actually say, so say this is my children, right? Is an HTML collection or a node list. You can just go, fine, and grab that element if that's the way you want to do it. It's solely open to you on how you want to do it. Yeah. Anyways, go ahead. And you can work with each other. Yeah, I'm coming. You're closing your function, right? Because you're closing. And so this is where you've got some design here. So this bracket here should be dead. Functions need a parameter unless you want to keep it parameter, right? So on the other side of that curly brace, you can set this. Nope, after the word function. Well, so that means all of those are parameters. This whole thing you just put in there is all parameters. You don't want that. That's your function block.
There's,
So you want function, opening parenthesis, closing
yeah,
parenthesis.
I know, there's something going on here, I forget what the instrument to change it to the right person.
Oh, I would delete that. Delete this.
No, but the cursor is that, and not, that's not the right one.
Oh, you're talking about inserts? Are you
What's
saying
going on?
you can't?
Because I just want here, and if I do that,
Oh, it's right there.
replacing
No worries. But inserts like anyway, so you need a closing parenthesis. You're not going to use this as your
Oh.
Blackboard main.js. Or everything, yeah, whatever. Just the main.js is what it is. Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Does it actually work? Like, did you check it? Yeah, you're good. Did you manage to find it?
On what?
Are you guys work?
It's supposed to be now. It's just I didn't have this.
It's floating brace here. What's it graphic? Oh, right, console look. That makes sense. It's missing semicolon threw me out.
Oh, file was not found. Interval. The thing,
You guys see your color scheme for one? Over here.